The Deputy is going to move us on with a check on some of the headlines in the French papers today. Hello there.
Hi.
Now, today, French MPs have got some very important work ahead of them. No splashing around going to the seaside for them. They're talking about some very contentious reforms to labour laws.
That's right. 11 sessions over the next 5 days, all with the goal of pushing through reforms to French labour laws as promised by Emmanuel Macron. It's a highly controversial topic and essentially once again sets a showdown between business owners and unions. Libé calls it baptism by fire on its front page, saying the government is hoping to expedite the process for a, quote, worrying reform, the first of Emmanuel Macron's mandate.
There's quite a lot of anger already before they even get going about the way that these reforms are going to be going ahead.
That's right, because essentially French MPs will be deciding what parts of the reform will be decided by ordonnance. This is a word you might hear a lot of in France. Ordonnance essentially means by imposition, bypassing debate in Parliament. So obviously this has gotten a lot of the opposition MPs rattled up. L'Humanité says the government is locking parliamentary debate, that it's preventing any form of discussion on the labour reforms. The communist paper criticised the government for pushing ahead like a bulldozer, I quote, with the goal of clearing the path for these reforms to be implemented, while Libé says the battle begins for round two because, of course, the last time that French parliamentarians debated labour laws, well, it resulted in nationwide protests. MPs are gearing up for a, quote, hot debate in the National Assembly, but the unions are worried about just how much negotiating power they'll have if the government decides to stifle debate.
All right, so we're talking about labour reforms. I'm sure many of our viewers know France has quite strict labour laws, quite a lot of protections for employees. So what exactly are we talking about changing?
Well, Le Figaro is taking us through the key issues of these labour reforms. In a nutshell, they seek to loosen up France's labour rules, or rather tight rules about hiring and firing workers. So they want to add more flexibility into the system. Le Figaro speaks of a reform in 3 blocks. So firstly, give a more central place to collective bargaining between employers and employees. Secondly, they want to merge all the different union structures into one umbrella organization in a company. And thirdly, they want to cap compensation that workers can receive when they take employers to court for things like unfair dismissal. But of course, it's drawn backlash from the left, especially the far left party, who are already planning protests beginning this Wednesday.
All right, watch out for that on the streets of Paris. Staying with sort of political issues, but away from the Parliament itself, Le Parisien is taking a look at some of the casualties of the recent elections. The people who were so-called victims of President Macron's party's landslide win.
That's right. Beaten in the election. What has become of these so-called losers of the French presidential election? That's what Le Parisien is looking at. In this really interesting article, they basically explain that victims of the Macron wave find themselves without a mandate, with some without even without party backing, and many have been left to ponder their political future for the first time in a long time, and even contemplate going back to a regular job.
What? I mean, can you imagine?
5, Monday to Friday job, paying taxes like the rest of us.
Can I just say I would take a 9-to-5 job? Just putting it out there.
Many of these victims, if we can call them that, and you'll see that they're not really victims at all, they come from the Socialist Party or the Conservative Les Républicains, the 2 major parties in France that really got a thrashing in the elections. Many of them have been politicians for decades, so it begs the question, is there life after politics? Many have chosen to return to the private sector, like Arnaud Montebourg, for instance, who was a candidate in the socialist primaries. Marion Maréchal Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's niece, well, she quit politics altogether. As for François Fillon, he's promised to deliver a tell-all, his side of the story, while Benoît Hamon, whose party essentially abandoned him during the elections, has said he's, quote, reflecting on a future professional activity, but he's far from having to live out of his car cat. He's still receiving a handsome salary as a former French MP.
Oh, interesting indeed. All right, well, he might not need saving, but one iconic Paris monument does need a bit of saving. There's a lot of talk at the moment about all this restoration work that's needed at Notre Dame Cathedral.
That's right. Notre Dame is in desperate need of some renovation work. The arrow on the top of the structure has been damaged by water, while the structure supporting the roof on the inside is also in need of some R&R. Well, Le Parisien says these serious renovations will take place from September onwards for the next 3 or 4 years. So it's a long period. The problem is that the government is chipping in about 2 million a year for the renovations, but that's not enough. So the monuments authorities have launched an appeal for donations, hoping to reach, they say, 150 million euros in the next 30 years. And they're appealing to the Americans. They're actually going on a U.S. tour next year to raise funds for the cathedral because, I quote, Americans have this culture of donating.
And speaking of tours, the Tour de France, some heartbreak at this cycling race at the weekend.
Let's look at the front page of L'Équipe, the French sports page. Fou. Crazy day for the cyclists. You had yellow jersey holder Chris Froome, who had some technical issues, Australian cyclist who had a horrific crash, while Frenchman Warren Barguil, who thought he'd won the stage, only to be overtaken by a Colombian rider. It was a crazy day for all those on the Tour de France.
Never a dull moment. Thanks very much, Diptyque Laurent. We'll see you later for the international papers.